The median home in America cost $429,156. The median household income is $83,730. That is a ratio of 5.1 to 1, meaning the typical American home now costs more than 5 years of gross household income before a single dollar is spent on food, taxes, transportation, or keeping the lights on. The historical threshold of affordability is 3.0. We blew past it a decade ago and never looked back. To afford a median-priced home today, with a 20% down payment and a 30-year mortgage at 6.38%, you need to earn $106,731 a year. That is $23,000 more than what the average American household actually makes. In 39 states and the District of Columbia, more than 65% of households are mathematically locked out of buying a new home. This is not a market correction. This is not a bubble waiting to pop. This is a structural failure 50 years in the making, and it is rewriting the American dream in real time. How we got here. In 1960, the median American home cost $11,900. The median income was $5,600. The price-to-income ratio, 2.1. A single earner without a college degree could buy a house and raise a family. That was the deal. That was the American contract. By 1980, the median home was $63,700, and the ratio held at 3.0, even as Paul Volcker's Federal Reserve drove mortgage rates to an all-time peak of 18.63%. Homes were expensive to finance, but they were still priced within reach. The principal hadn't detached from wages yet. But something else happened in the late 70s and 80s that would echo for decades. Municipalities across the country began adopting exclusionary zoning codes, minimum lot sizes, maximum height restrictions, parking minimums. These rules, sold as neighborhood preservation, quietly guaranteed that future housing supply would never keep pace with demand. The 90s and 2000s brought falling rates and reckless deregulation, subprime lending, no-income verification loans, predatory financial engineering. By 2006, the price-to-income ratio in some metrics blew past 7.0, the largest asset bubble in modern history, and then it all collapsed. The 2008 crash didn't just destroy household wealth, it destroyed the home building industry. Builders went bankrupt. Construction workers left the trades permanently. New housing starts plummeted 90% from their peak. The decade that followed, 2010 to 2019, became a lost decade for construction, silently accumulating a deficit of millions of homes while the largest generation in American history, the millennials, entered their prime home-buying years with nothing to buy. The pandemic detonation. Then COVID hit and detonated every fault line at once. The Federal Reserve slashed rates to stimulate the economy. The 30-year fixed mortgage hit an all-time low of 2.65% in January 2021. Simultaneously, remote work untethered millions of high-earning white-collar workers from expensive coastal cities. Armed with federal stimulus money and historically cheap debt, they flooded the Sun Belt, the Mountain West, and the Midwest, driving bidding wars that stripped the market bare. Between 2019 and 2024, nominal home prices surged 48% nationally. Median income grew 22%. The gap between what homes cost and what people earn ripped wider than at any point since the pre-crash peak. Then, the Fed reversed course to fight inflation. Mortgage rates vaulted from 3% to over 7% in 2023 before settling into the mid-sixes by early 2026. The monthly payment on a median-priced home more than doubled, from roughly $919 in 2012 to over $2,207 today. And non-mortgage costs, property taxes, and homeowners insurance have surged 35% since 2019, now consuming 21% of a homeowner's total monthly payment. 4 million missing homes. The crisis is not just about prices and interest rates. It is about physical reality. The United States does not have enough homes. Realtor.com estimates the national housing deficit at 4.03 million units, the third largest annual gap since 2012. Up for Growth puts it at 3.78 million. Freddie Mac says 3.7 million. Even the most conservative estimate from J.P. Morgan acknowledges a shortage of 1.2 million. In 2025, total housing starts came in at 1.36 million, below the 1.41 million new households formed that year. We are falling further behind. Closing a 4 million unit gap would require the construction industry to increase production by 50% for 7 consecutive years. And 4 structural barriers make that nearly impossible. First, zoning. In most major cities, upwards of 70% of residential land is legally restricted to single-family detached homes. Duplexes, triplexes, townhomes, the missing middle, are effectively banned. Second, NIMBYism. Even where zoning allows density, local opposition weaponizes environmental review and community hearings to delay or kill projects, adding years and millions in costs. Third, construction costs are surging at 12.6% annualized, with aluminum up over 30% and tariffs adding an estimated $10,000 to the baseline cost of every new home. Fourth, the labor crisis. The 2008 crash drove skilled tradespeople out of the industry permanently. The sector needs 349,000 net new workers in 2026 just to meet baseline demand. And immigrants, who comprise 25% of the construction workforce, face tightening border restrictions. The lock-in trap. If the supply deficit is the chronic disease, the lock-in effect is the heart attack. During the pandemic, millions of Americans locked in 30-year mortgages between 2.5 and 4.0%. Now that rates sit above 6%, selling means surrendering that rate and borrowing at nearly double the cost. For a typical household, moving to a similarly priced home would increase the monthly payment by roughly $1,000. These sub-4% mortgages have become golden handcuffs. The numbers are staggering. Nearly 70% of all mortgage holders currently possess a rate of 5% or lower. 20% are below 3%. A 2026 survey found that 25% of homeowners with sub-5% rates said no amount of money could convince them to give up their current mortgage. 38% said they'd need rates to drop below 4.5% before they'd consider selling, a threshold no mainstream forecast expects anytime soon. This creates a doom loop. Owners won't sell, so inventory stays suppressed. Low inventory means intense competition for the few homes that list. Competition keeps prices high despite elevated rates, and high prices plus high rates lock out first-time buyers completely. The market is frozen, reliant almost entirely on new construction to provide supply. The Wall Street myth. If you spend any time on social media, you've heard the explanation. Wall Street is buying all the houses. Corporate landlords are pricing families out, and there is a real kernel of truth buried in there. But the data tells a very different story than the outrage suggests. Overall investor activity captured 34% of home purchases in the third quarter of 2025. But the overwhelming majority are small-scale mom-and-pop landlords and local flippers, not Wall Street. Large institutional investors, entities owning 1,000 or more homes, own less than 1% of all single-family homes nationally and represent about 3% of the rental stock. They've actually been net sellers of real estate for 7 consecutive quarters. The catch is concentration. In targeted Sunbelt markets, their footprint is enormous. Up to 25% of rentals in Atlanta, 21% in Jacksonville, 18% in Charlotte. But nationally, blaming Wall Street for the affordability crisis misdiagnoses the disease. The problem is not who's buying. The problem is that we didn't build enough for anyone to buy. Who's getting crushed? The crisis does not hit everyone equally. It is a massive, regressive wealth transfer, punishing the young and minorities while inflating the wealth of older homeowners who bought in cheaper decades. In 1981, the median first-time homebuyer was 29 years old. By 2025, that age hit a record 40. The typical down payment has more than doubled since 2019 to $30,400. It now takes the average household 7 years to save for a down payment, double the pre-pandemic norm. In San Jose, saving for a down payment on a median earner's salary takes over 30 years. An estimated 1.8 million potential millennial and Gen Z households are missing, trapped with roommates, or living with parents purely because of affordability. The racial wealth gap compounds the damage. White homeownership stands at 75.1%. Black homeownership, 44.2%. Among Americans under 44, Black households are only half as likely to own a home as white households. 57% of Black renters and 54% of Hispanic renters are cost-burdened, spending more than 30% of income on housing, compared to 45% of white renters. And the most devastating second-order effect is one nobody talks about. The U.S. fertility rate has fallen to a historic low of 1.6 children per woman, well below the 2.1 replacement rate. A University of Toronto study found that half of the recent decline in American birth rates is directly attributable to rising housing costs. If housing had stayed affordable since 1990, an estimated 13 million more children would have been born. The three-bedroom premium, the crushing cost of family-sized housing near good schools and jobs, is acting as the ultimate form of economic birth control. What actually works? Every politician in America has a housing plan, tax credits, down payment assistance, rate buydowns, and housing economists overwhelmingly warn all of those make it worse. Injecting more purchasing power into a market starved of physical supply just lets sellers raise prices. You cannot subsidize your way out of a shortage. The fix is supply. And we know it works because Minneapolis proved it. In 2018, Minneapolis became the first major city to abolish single-family zoning entirely, legalized duplexes and triplexes on every residential lot, eliminated parking minimums. Between 2017 and 2022, the city increased its housing stock by 12% and kept rent growth to just 1%. The rest of Minnesota added 4% and saw rents jump 14%. Researchers estimate the reform kept Minneapolis home prices 16 to 34% lower than they would have been without it. Globally, Tokyo is the proof of concept at scale. A nationalized zoning code lets developers build by right. No community vetoes, no environmental lawsuits designed to stall construction. Despite being one of the largest cities on Earth, housing consumes a far smaller share of household income than in any comparable American metro.